Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mental Wealth Mondays with Ashe Counseling. I'm so happy you are here. I see people are coming in. So welcome. Today, we are going to be talking with one of our therapists at Ashe Counseling. We have Kristen Widing, and I'm so excited about this topic, you guys, because she's going to talk about cognitive distortions. And you're probably like, what is that? But once we get into it, you're probably going to start to recognize and see yourselves. We all have them. Sometimes we have multiple, multiple parts of that, or it might affect us in different parts of our lives. So let's get started, Kristen. Well, first of all, before we get started, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself and who you are?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So like Mandisa said, I'm Kristen. I work here. I've been a therapist here for almost a year and a half now.
Year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. So I live in Chicago. I grew up around the area, got my master's degree in social work. I actually went back to school to get a certificate to work in a school, to be a school social worker, but I'm enjoying private practice so much, I'm going to stick with private practice. So I'm really happy to be here. Topic that I'm talking about today, cognitive distortions, sometimes called thinking errors, sometimes called thinking patterns. They're a really important topic, and they're also one of my favorites. So I'll try not to nerd out too hard.
Yeah, I mean, we'll try to post things up if people need clarification. And you guys, please make sure if you have questions or comments, we'll love to hear from you. This is an opportunity to ask a therapist questions about, you might not be able to have access to therapy right now. So here's an opportunity to ask some questions. So we welcome that. So we'll be looking out for that. You can put that in the comments.
Absolutely. And if I don't see a comment because I'm chatting, Mandisa, please let me know, and I will. Yeah. I'm more than happy to take a minute to answer your questions.
Okay, good. Yeah. So tell us about cognitive distortions. What is that?
Alrighty. So basically, these are exaggerated or negatively biased thought patterns that can sometimes lead us to view or perceive our reality in a negative or just incorrect way. They're kind of automatic thoughts that surface that aren't actually true, but they can certainly feel very true. And I think that's a really important part about cognitive distortions or thinking errors, because our thoughts can have such a huge influence or impact on how we feel and how we act. Sometimes when we get stuck in these thought patterns, that are untrue or maybe unhelpful or, distorted, it can contribute to things like anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and other mental health issues. I know Mandisa mentioned it earlier, but I really wanted to kind of emphasize it, that it's really important to kind of know that these are patterns or cognitive distortions that everybody has to some degree. But when they are in extreme forms, that's when they can be harmful and they can contribute to our overall life in a negative way. They can cause us to kind of base our feelings and our emotions on maybe faulty accusations or assumptions.
Yeah. How can someone know, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about some popular ones, but how can someone know the difference between a distortion or a thought error and the truth?
And the truth? Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think that's one of them, that really looking at the facts of a situation, asking yourself, do I know that for sure? right? Or is this maybe a thought that I'm having? Being able to pinpoint some of these as well will be helpful. So even just being able to label like, oh, that is blank. We'll get into the names a little bit, but knowing what cognitive distortion it is will help to kind of pull apart that maybe this isn't true. Maybe this is one of those cognitive distortions that they were talking about.
Yeah.
So being aware of those will help kind of lead us to what thoughts are correct and maybe what thoughts are heading us in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I like what you said, and it's important to recognize like the cycle that our thoughts, if anyone, you guys have ever done any cognitive behavior therapy, there's this cycle, right, of your thoughts affect emotions, affect your actions, which also loops back into the thoughts, into the emotions, into the actions, and it keeps you in this cycle. And so recognizing, the thoughts that are starting this cycle can help you break free of that. Would you agree?
Totally. I totally agree. It, sometimes can be viewed as a triangle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even just a circle of this cycle. And knowing these cognitive distortions kind of can be one of the many things within CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, to
Mm-hmm.
help kind of pull you out of it. So I have a couple that I listed, but I'm curious at the end of them if Mandisa, you have any others that you wanted to add.
Okay.
There's many out there, so I will note that first. But these are a couple that, I maybe have noticed, and Mandisa, you can, comment on this, that are the most common.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is all or nothing thinking. So
Yep.
this is thinking in terms of absolute, right? So it's also known as black or white thinking. There is no room for gray area. You are either good or bad. You either succeeded or you failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So an example of this could be, let's say you were on a diet and you had just one spoonful of ice cream, right? And you thought right away, my diet is ruined. And so that thought kind of created that emotion of maybe feeling guilty or maybe feeling bad about yourself. So you kind of just went and ate the whole tub of ice cream, right? Was your diet really ruined because you just had one spoonful? No, but that's what that thought had you feel. It was either all or nothing. You had to do the entire strict diet or not at all.
Yeah, I see that a lot with people who are, especially like professionals. If you miss a deadline and then you're this, or
Missed
they're,
a meal even.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're this terrible person, or you just, you're not good at your job, but that's not necessarily true. Um, and so, but people will take that, to the extreme. I think that's probably one of the most common ones I see a lot.
I totally agree. This next one, overgeneralization, is kind of similar to it, but it's different in that, you see a negative event as almost like a never ending pattern. So you'll hear words as like always or never. You kind of exaggerate a bad situation and it makes it a little bit worse. So a really common example is that you're running late to an appointment, right? We're all human. We've all ran late to an appointment, right? We're all going to be late again someday. But when we get these cognitive distortions, we tell ourselves, I'm always late. I'm never on time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be, when exaggerated, a little bit harmful to your self-esteem and overall well-being.
Yeah. And that's, and that's another common one that I see too. And it does relate to the black and white thinking. But then if you are thinking you're always late, and what do? You end up, perpetuating that thought because you're thinking, I'm always late, I'm always late. And somehow we find a way to sabotage ourselves because our thoughts, and we believe this to be true about ourselves, then it comes out that way.
Sure, yeah. It kind of provides that almost backwards validation that, well, I knew I was going to be late. At least I was right about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me
Definitely.
about some other ones that you have there. This is so fascinating.
So these next ones, there's two kind of subcategories. So it's mind reading. You conclude that a reaction or something that someone was thinking without checking any facts and without any real evidence to it. So the first one that we usually, oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. It's jumping to conclusions is the main, and then the subcategory is mind reading and fortune telling. So jumping to conclusions, right? You interpret things negatively without any evidence or support that they're going to end up that way. So mind reading, right? Having this overall assumption that somebody is thinking about you negatively without any evidence or any facts that that person is thinking that way. It's kind of based on your projection about how you feel about something, right? So an example, maybe a friend doesn't return your call. You think they must be mad at me, right? That may not be true. Maybe they're on vacation or busy, but that kind of first initial jumping to conclusions of they're mad at you may be making you feel a little like maybe even doubting your friendship.
Yeah. And what happens is, because I get that a lot when I send emails to the group, there's about 20 of us, and I'll send an email about something, and it's never, personal. And every now and then I'll get a phone call or email. Was that directed to me? Like, no, that didn't have anything to do with you. But a lot of times, it feels like that because maybe that's something, that you're the person is dealing with. And that maybe they feel seen, in a way, and they project.
Sure, totally. And I'm kind of glad that you gave that example, Mandisa, because it goes to show how, even those who know these cognitive distortions, we still engage in them. We're still human, right?
Yeah.
Nobody is allowed to pass these, right? We're good at training our minds, just like everyone can.
Yeah.
Next subcategory is fortune telling. So anticipating things will turn out badly or predict disaster every time. For example, you give a presentation and you tell yourself, I know it's going to go really, really bad, right? For example, if I were to come on this beforehand and kind of think, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I know I'm going to be bad. No one's going to enjoy this. I probably would have a lot different reaction than how I came into this presentation of, I'm excited to kind of share these things. Sure, I'm a little nervous, but I'm human and I'm allowed to do that. But it was a different mindset. And that one's fortune telling. Do you have anything to comment on that, Mandisa?
I wonder, because when we're thinking about these, I wonder how do they, and I haven't done the research, so I know this is just off the cuff, but how does that affect into when we're doing our protective factors, right? Like fortune telling in a way of preparing for, if I'm thinking, oh, it's going to go bad, or this is not going to work out, to protect myself from disappointment or failure.
Sure. Yeah, totally. It absolutely can be that. And it can, they can be used to kind of protect or to validate or to push away some emotions maybe that you're not wanting to feel. I think that could probably be a whole different episode on maybe why some of these things surface, as well as how do you really start to challenge these. But I think overall, the first step is really beginning to notice and label what some of these things are.
Yeah. I think that's so key. If you are, because you might not be aware, you might not be aware that you're doing it, but once you are aware, you might not stop it, right? You might still do it, but then at least you can have a label, and that might stop the process. Because I think a lot of times our thoughts, because this is what we're talking about, it happens so quickly that it spirals, and we're into this, like you said, the fortune telling, we're thinking all this, it could go from, oh, my boss doesn't like me, to I'm about to get fired, and all, you could go down that rabbit hole. But at least if you are recognizing some of the clues that you are having, doing a cognitive distortion, you give yourself a chance to stop, slow down, and think. You might still keep that rabbit hole, but you might not, right? You might give yourself an opportunity to say, no, wait a minute, this might not be about me. This is, how can I look at this differently?
Sure. Kind of checking the facts of a situation or the evidence, right? To really see if it's based on reality or if it's based on a little bit of those thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Do you think some of these cognitive distortions can be helpful?
Helpful in what way?
So, like when, especially, like if we were working with people who are dealing with like perfectionism, they tend to, have these cognitive distortions, but sometimes it helps them exceed because they were so worried or concerned, that their boss didn't like them, that they overachieved and did this stellar project because they had these fears. So the evidence of the fear. So now they're like, well, because, I've worked through this. There was, this particular case that I was working on some years ago where the client was pregnant, and she, had these, overwhelming thoughts about being pregnant, when she was pregnant, and the fears that associated with that. But because she was so over the top with it, she ended up catching something and had to go into early labor, and it ended up saving the baby's life. So now that reinforced, like, well, if I wasn't, if I didn't go down that rabbit hole, that could have went a different way. And that could be frustrating, on the therapist side. It's like, well, reframe and think. But when you have something, when you have a concrete example of how it helped you.
Right. No, and I think that's the frustrating thing of a lot of these that we work with, and especially, some anxiety of what kind of a little bit, it sounds like what you were describing, they were checking on that and wanted to make sure that everything was okay. Mm-hmm. There is always that chance that things are the way that you really initially thought about, right? But looking at that evidence and looking at that facts, I think is going to at least help you to kind of decipher which way it is.
Because I think, especially with COVID, right? And I found it, really hard to help people reframe who had a lot of fears around COVID, and catching it. I mean, it's still even now, and I can't say, well, look at this differently. And then they're like, no, look at this evidence on the news. Like, or, I had, a client really concerned about carjacking. And I'm like, I can't say, oh, reframe and look at this. And she's like, no, my neighbor just got carjacked. I'm really afraid. And so, but you can't live in that fear. And so it's hard to help someone reframe when they have such strong evidence. Tell me, have you had that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can probably all validate that there's times where, there's things like that are just justifiable, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where that kind of acceptance piece comes in handy a little bit. That, I would never want to take away or even try to reframe someone to not be scared of hijacking or COVID-19, like you said. That's just not realistic. But it can be when it's overpowering and it's overwhelming. That's when it's important to kind of take a look at maybe what's exaggerating that thought, or how can you protect yourself if it were to happen. Kind of instead of viewing the thoughts as so impactful and really interrupting everyday life, to how can I still have these thoughts and continue to live?
Yeah.
Which, a lot easier said than done.
Yeah. And that's important that, what you said about checking in with yourself. And if this is preventing you from living, a good quality of life, if you're afraid of COVID and you're not, and now things are open, are you still afraid? Are you not doing the things, that you need to do, getting your medications and getting, food and groceries and, things that and actually getting oxygen and air. And is this preventing you? And what's going to be more important in the long run? Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, I had two more that I had on my
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So one of them, I have a funny example, at least I hope, since, well, I guess I don't know where the viewers are from, but if
Yeah.
you're from Chicago, you'll understand it. Magnification and minimization. You either exaggerate the importance of an event or an error, or you minimize the importance of something that you did. So one that I do a lot is in the winter when I'm shoveling the snow off my car. Every time I magnify the situation, I jump to, I'm leaving this state. It is way too cold. Why do we live here, right? I make that situation that was very, very small into a very big one. And that's just one that I have to remind myself that this is normal part of living in Chicago. We have a bunch of snow. It'll be okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think people do that a lot, magnifying things, situations. It could be, at work or at school and or in relationships. I think we see that a lot, where we just really take things to the next level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the next one, which goes kind of a lot with relationships as well, is emotional labeling. You sometimes avoid or discount your thinking, and you base it off of your emotions. So if you're, maybe feeling like you're lonely, it's, you kind of come up with the assumption that you must be alone, right? Or if you feel like you're a loser, then therefore you must be a loser, right? If you feel like your relationship is unhealthy, it therefore must be unhealthy, right? So you're really identifying by that emotion that you're feeling. And it's not necessarily always true, right? Just because you feel alone doesn't mean you're actually alone, right? Just because you feel like maybe your relationship is unhealthy doesn't mean the entire relationship is going to fail or that it's unhealthy. It's just currently an emotion.
Yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with like the overgeneralizing almost. Yeah. And one of the ones that I also see, and I think we talked a little bit about it, is taking things personal. And when people see that everything is about them. And one of my favorite books, I don't know, have you ever read The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz?
Yep.
And the one that's the hardest, like the other ones are easy peasy. The one about, not taking things personal and applying that to everything, for me, is so helpful. But it's hard when, sometimes it might really feel personal, but a lot of times it's not even about you. My, favorite example that I like to share is one time I was in Starbucks. This was before COVID and everything, like right before the pandemic, actually. And I was in Starbucks and I wanted to they had the Christmas cups on sale. So I picked the wrong one that wasn't on sale. And at this time, I'm the only one in there. So the guys like, oh, this was on sale. That was not on sale, but get the other one. And they were like 50% off. So I was like, okay. So I was going to get another one, and another young lady came in and she was like standing right in front of the register. So he had the register like ready for me to pay. I just had to come back. And so I'm standing there because I couldn't get to him to give him my card and give him the cup. And I said, excuse me. And so she says she doesn't move. And I do see her kind of like looking down on her phone. And I said, excuse me, I need to pay. And she must have yelled. I mean, when I say so loud, I mean, she like just yelled with like at the top of her lungs. And like I said, we were the only ones in this Starbucks. And so the guy was looking, and I said, you know what? It's not about me. it's not about, I kept telling her, I was like, it's not about me. It's not about me. I didn't do anything wrong in the situation. It's not about me. And
Yeah.
so then after she yelled, she did move. I paid for my stuff. I didn't respond. And you know how you go over, you step over to get your drink. And
Sure.
so then, waiting on my drink. And then she came and she was like, can I pay for your drink? She was like, I'm so sorry. She said, I got a very disturbing text. Just at that moment, I was trying to process it. She was like, she was like, that was so uncalled for. I am so embarrassed. She was just apologizing. I said,
Right.
don't worry about it. I already paid. I was like, it's no big deal. I hope
Yeah.
everything's okay. And, moved on. But I think, because I could have confronted her and it could have been a big altercation. But,
Absolutely.
me not responding and telling myself, okay, it's not about me, even though she was yelling, embarrassing me in a way.
Yeah.
It wasn't about me. And I think
Right.
a lot of times if we can, that will solve so much.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I'm glad that you brought that one up. I think that's a really important one and almost one that I see and, full disclosure, personally, I have to remind myself as much as, that kind of all or nothing thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some tips or some tools that we can give our audience to how to recognize some of these cognitive distortions and what can they do about it?
Yeah. Like I said, I think the first thing really is overall just learning kind of what they are, right? And the next thing is, starting to begin to really kind of take a look at your thoughts and recognizing them for what they are almost.
Mhm.
They are thoughts. They're not tangible, they're not real, you can't see
Mhm.
them. They're thoughts. But there's a lot of different reframing techniques or things like that. I don't know how much you want me to go into
I mean,
detail
we
with.
got whatever. I mean, we got a few minutes, so you could go. Yeah.
Sure. One of the most common reframing techniques, I think, is saying that, one, labeling what it is, and then trying to come up with a different alternative, right? So if you're thinking, for example, let's go with the my friend doesn't call me back, right? And you initially think that that friend is very mad at you and you're really upset because your friend doesn't call you back, right? You're kind of mind reading. You're saying she's mad at me. She doesn't want to be my friend anymore. She doesn't like me. It might kind of spiral your day, like you said, into that thought and then that behavior of I don't really want to talk to her, and that feeling of maybe hurt or, feeling just kind of sad about it, right? And so, one, challenging yourself to maybe label, if you can name the cognitive distortion, that'd be great. If not, it's not that relevant, but knowing that, is that true? Is this an unhelpful or, unhelpful or untrue thought, right? Ask
Right. It's
yourself,
accurate, right?
do I know the facts? No, I guess I don't. I didn't call her. I didn't ask if she was mad at me. So maybe coming up with a different alternative, right? Until
Mhm.
you can find out those facts. So instead of telling myself that she's mad at me, maybe I would change that to she might be really busy right now. I'll try to catch up with her later, right?
Mhm.
And really then see if I can ask her, were you mad at me earlier or whatever it is. But you can already kind of see how maybe having that she's mad at me, she's not talking to me is going to create a different feeling than maybe she's really busy and I'll catch up with her later.
Mhm. Yeah, because what happens is, we talked a little bit about the cycle, and the reason why this is important, because what can happen is if you're thinking, oh, she's mad at me, and then that might not be true, and then they call a text, well, you're going to act a little different. And then that's going to send a message to them that you're mad at them. And then they may not be as responsive and see,
Yeah.
and that's what then you say, see, I told you she was mad at me. And it's that cycle. So it's so important that it starts with you to recognize, and she might be, but then that gives you an opportunity to say, what's going on? I noticed that you hadn't called me back. Is, everything okay?
Yeah.
And that opens up a dialogue, and then there's no one is making assumptions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's challenging, but it's a really helpful tool.
Yeah. Would you, because I know you are also like into mindfulness, does that also help into recognizing thoughts, or able to sort of control your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think mindfulness it's a little bit of the I don't want to use the word acceptance. I guess that's a word. Like the acceptance of our thoughts, right? It's being the observer of our thoughts instead of identifying as our thoughts, right? So it's allowing us to take a step back and view our thoughts as like maybe a cloud or a bubble in the sky, right? Instead of viewing our thoughts as what we are. And I think I hope you can still understand me.
Yeah, it just kind of refreshed right there. But I think I can see you. Okay, I think, hold on 1 second. Excuse me. I might need to refresh. So I'll refresh this and come back. Sometimes that happens. 1 second. Where's my refresh?
Hopefully she'll come back.
Okay. I think there's a storm here, so we've been having some issues.